Dominic Fragman here with the spirit of innovation and freedom, and this is Progress Culture. Progress Culture is a weekly happening where master drummer Paul F. Murphy and I share live improvised music and impromptu conversations with people from various fields and expertises about community, value, art, science, freedom, and progress for all. The show started during the coronavirus pandemic and is recorded weekly in an airport hangar in California, Maryland at TechPort, a University of Maryland research facility in the Innovation District of St. Mary's County, Southern Maryland. Our music has been recognized as a brand new sound in music, and we love to share our work and the mindset of improvisation, innovation, and creativity from our perspective as well as others in the community. We are excited to share it all with you, so have a listen and see what's going on this week on Progress Culture. Now, let's get into the show, but first, let's hear some music. right, welcome everybody to this week's episode of Progress Culture. I am excited to be here today with my good friend, mentor, master drummer, Paul F. Murphy. Hello, Paul.
Hello. Great to be here.
Glad you're here all the time.
Yep.
And we also have a special guest today, Miles Mayshark Hamlin.
Yep.
An intern here at TechPort, one of the crew of our fantastic people here, and the orchestrator of the whole shebang and the facilitator of all the great things that come out of TechPort and Progress Culture, the director of TechPort, Tommy Luganville.
That was the best intro yet.
Hey.
The last good one was the pants where you said I had the best pants in the world. This one was better though.
I've been working on it,
Yeah.
You got to give these intros for people. And I kind of like that. So the focus of what we're doing here, obviously, is not so much on what we do as our professions or the things that we've accomplished. We're just talking about people stuff. And one of the things that kind of, I think, plays into it is the way that the approach to doing the intros. I don't really say anything other, I don't talk about what you guys have done. I'm just trying to come up with something.
That's cool with me.
He wears great pants. I mean,
he does.
Yeah.
It is wow. He accessorizes as well in a quality way.
My wife doesn't think that. But
no.
It's a form of expression.
I bet you she does think that.
I don't think she would use the word accessorize, but she would say peacocking is what she would say.
Well, everybody needs that.
Yeah.
As long as you can accompany it with a quality peacock call.
Yeah.
So.
I'm not doing that right now.
No?
No.
I bet you're good at it, though.
I can do a turkey call, but I'm not going to do a peacock call.
All right, well, I will sort of curtail the impromptu, improvisational nature of this show in the music and in the conversations. We have all been in the middle of a pandemic, and that's the way this show sort of came together. And the live event, the conversations were all improvised, and doing this every week I love to do. But, of course it's on my mind, and sometimes I think of things that are a little bit not improvised. And today I have the most non-improvised thing we've ever done, and that is I kind of wrote out a little intro to the question and thing that I'd like to set up for today, which is pretty ridiculous, huh? So I'm going to try to do this without feeling weird about it, so forgive me. But here we go. Imagine we're all wearing our best tuxedos here right now, and we are headed to a big special event. Red carpet, flashing cameras, lots of people and excitement. It's a marquee award show, an award show event. In our case, it's for food. And we're talking about the best food and food makers out there, the ones who people have proven to love over and over again. So what are you thinking? Food that's the most delicious, food that's the most nutritious, the best for you, right? This is a word show. Big deal. Up top of the chain type people. Now, we're in our seats, and the show starts, and awards are being earned by these cream of the crop folks. Awards are going to the top sellers of the foods that we all love the most, that taste the best, and are the best for you, right? McDonald's, Taco Bell, Bob Evans, right? The cream of the crop.
No.
That doesn't make sense to you? Is it?
The top 40 of food.
It seems interesting to me that this seems ridiculous, because I feel like this is the way we are consuming information and culture and art, and I just feel like if this doesn't resonate with people, it's exactly what's happening with our information, with our art and our culture. And if you're feeling like this is ridiculous and unacceptable, do you feel that way in regard to those other things?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there, and people don't need to put in the effort as much, per se, now to try to filter that out. Because there's a lot out there, and it takes a decent amount of effort to decipher what is right from wrong. And we tend to latch on to things that are easier for us to do, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if let's say I go to a car dealership and I'm more inclined to listen to them because I feel they know what they are saying, and I'm probably going to be more mindless per se versus mindful because I'm like, oh, this person knows what they're doing. They're explaining to me, and they might, but also taking a step back and receiving that information and putting it through, your inputs and outputs to try to figure out what's true, what's not true, is a useful skill that may be lacking overall in society.
Do you think that convenience is an inherent, inherently produces a less mindful?
I think that might be the case, but that's an opinion.
Yeah.
So I'll take part of what he said and agree, but then the question that I'll pose is this. What leads us to believe that misinformation hasn't existed for all time? Because if you go back, there's a lot of things that people made up. I heard a story the other day about there was actually a female pope, and no one really knows if this is true or not, which is also part of the problem, right? It's misinformation. So the thing is this, to Miles's point, nowadays it's easy and we have too much information, whereas back then we didn't have enough information.
Sure.
So I guess the thing that I'm trying to grapple with is, was there ever a point where we had the balance of both worlds, where we had enough information to filter out the one source, which was the church, versus now, which is like I go into my phone and like anybody can tweet something. So I don't know, like it's weird. Did we ever have a balance is my question, and I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
What are your thoughts, Paul?
I think it's probably the right time to try to find a balance, because I don't believe we have had a balance. And that can be seen just in looking at the world itself.
Right.
The populations of whatever animals or humans, they're not all in balance. And I don't think they have been in balance for a very long time. And I know that man is trying to go forward and move directions into outer space and also deep into medical and engineering fields, and that's a great venture. But I think truth has to be recognized before proceeding way, way farther at a great, great breakneck speed.
Yeah.
Because not everybody on the planet is living in a very great situation.
Right.
But Miles brought up a good point yesterday when we were talking, and like I agree with you, Paul, that not everyone's in a good situation. But Miles, you said that someone now who's making like minimum wage, who gets to bathe every day, is living a better life than someone who was a king 400 years ago.
Yeah, I was trying to bring at the point why people are happy versus unhappy, and it's just a guess from my personal situation and what I've seen throughout life. It's how we develop our opinions. But based on what I've seen, people and what I've read in the books, of course, people weren't living so great a while ago, compared to today. So nowadays, someone can take a bath every day versus maybe a king took a bath once a year, who was in St. Petersburg, and he's, So the standard of living is much higher where we are versus time. If you compare, we can compare to location, but we can also compare to time, the standard of living. So really someone who may be unhappy about his situation, because I'm sure a king maybe is happier about his situation than compared to a peasant, to the socioeconomic class that he's in. But some people today who in comparison are lower than others may be living better than a king. But it's the comparison, I believe, that keeps people apart, maybe, and there's classism because of the comparison, and unhappy, and that can cause some unhappiness too.
But that goes back to Dominic's point about information almost.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I kind of want to interject here, and I find this is a consistent question that or point that people will posit in these, sort of pondering what is and what could be, is we have this real tendency to base things off how things have been. And that we never had that before, right? Things are better now than they were, or we compare to points in history for our evidence that something is possible. I find that interesting. Do you guys? How do you feel about that? Do you think it's necessary to hinge what has come before to show what is possible for the future? Or is there a way that we can practice even just a mindset and thinking that facilitates the transformation into what could be and may be good for all, as opposed to, we have never done that before, so...
No, we've talked about this before. Yeah. The Goldilocks syndrome, the Golden Age syndrome. Mm-hmm. Things were better. No, they weren't. It goes back to your point, which is like the information awards show, right? So all the people who won the information awards show in 1800, those are all the ones that we learn everything from, right? So they won the Grammy award for whatever information newspaper of the year. So we know what they tell us. Mm. But as you start to kind of like go through it all, you're like, no, we 100% have made progress, as far as I'm concerned, in most ways than we haven't.
Sure.
So this idea of hinging on things in the past, that is a futile exercise.
I imagine that there are very awesome, high quality things that we could point out from every era of time.
Yeah.
Prehistoric to now. Whatever we know about what people were living like, whether or not it's what you want to believe that people had a better developed third eye that you could actually see, and a universal consciousness where you could transfer information to your entire community by having a dream, or it's just the fact that these men and women who were out in the elements with all of the predators were able to develop fire and tools, and that is pretty spectacular.
It is.
So you can't say that it was, I don't want to say you can't say it was better or worse, because I, for one, don't really want to be chased by giant things that can kill me, but we're fortunate to have that pretty well mediated right now, and that I am grateful for, as well as my standard typical things of indoor plumbing is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, even like seersucker, the outfits.
Yes.
Right. I mean, the only reason people wore those is because it was so hot, right? Yeah. Now they're a fashion statement, but there's a lot of things that are better now than they used to be.
I just realized how awesome big hats are. I'm a pretty pale dude, and when I get out in the sun these days, it's pretty infrequent because for a long time I was kind of like a vampire. You go out at night, you play your gigs, you meet your people, you come home, it's really early in the morning, and you go to bed, whatever, and you don't see the sunshine because you wake up and you practice for 12 hours inside. And man, those big hats can save your life. But I've never worn one. I might have to acquire one.
I still think, though, that there's a larger percentage right now doing well and being happy. Perhaps it's larger than it was in the past. I don't think it's that much larger, though.
I think that...
And going forward on that, I mean, if you just take a look at what's happening around the world right now, in places like Brazil, they need a lot of help. They need help. They're asking for help.
Right.
Help should be given. Also, here in America, we've seen Black Lives Matter and protest. They're asking for help, along with the American Indian, who's also asking for help. And I think that the real leaders need to break away for a quick second from trillionaireship and start looking at the world as a planet in general. Because if we're going to start going into outer space and populating, I don't think you want to bring the warring plane with you there.
Right.
I like to hop on the point. It's kind of like in between you two about how like where there's an imbalance between us and animals, and how about it's great that we're progressing forward in different subject areas, mostly technology,
Pretty much.
but and how there might be an imbalance in growth, not just necessarily like a static position, but in growth there might be an imbalance. And how you said that there like some people are upset about change, or it was better in the past. So there's a little bit of discrepancy I see here, and I like to combine those two and bring up the point that I think every time we move forward as a society, there's always going to be an imbalance with what is a good change and a bad change. And sometimes we have more bad changes, and sometimes we have more good changes. And it's hard to tell how it's hard to evaluate that unless we experience it. And if we don't experience that good change, we're not going to know it's good, and vice versa. So it will change with time, and we need to make sure that those changes are recognized. And sometimes it makes sure we can find a way to make a balance possible, or try to achieve that balance, even though it's really difficult to know in something in the future an expectation will work out. We don't know, but that's something that could be worked on. That would probably make people happier on both sides.
Do you have thoughts about how that balance could better be achieved? Like how could we
That is
what are
very
ways that
difficult
we
question.
could organize ourselves?
In theory, I guess depending on whose history you read, okay, right? Back to your point of information. In theory, the way that the founders structured democracy here, or whatever we want to call it, it was supposed to be designed so that sweeping change could not take place, because they were so afraid of a coup, or they were so afraid of they're going to start this new government and then immediately it's just going to get overthrown, because that was like all the rage in the world history at that point in time, was just governments toppling and kings getting offed, and they were just they were just afraid of that happening. So in theory, the way they designed it was that you do have to go through a process to change things. The question again that I always bring back to is, have we gone too far? Are we too slow now?
Well, but let's talk about this too from, if we can get, I'm not saying, I'd like to get to the much of a root of it as we can, and I would say that organization at that point in history, for our history as the United States of America, that if we were saying that a sweeping change is unnecessary, right? We need to go through this process in order to guarantee that it resembles something that is like this, or if it's going to change, it's going to be a positive shift. That we built that idea for the sort of slowing down of change or whatever, based off of a set of organizing principles that maybe weren't necessarily the best for everyone. And if you lock that in, what have you locked in? And so if it makes it difficult to change, and maybe some of that stuff, you know, the way, I don't know how we shift these things, even to sort of go back to the beginning, where it's like, do you have any thoughts about how we might be able to foster an interest in people that drives a little bit more curiosity in what they consume and what they put into their bodies, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, product-wise, the entities that they engage with, that even if they have to do research on them first, to be aware that maybe perhaps this product was made by the depleting of a resource which should be considered a commons. such as something that comes from the earth. That how did you come to own this? How did you come to own these resources, food, natural energy resources and stuff, and now people don't have access to them because of a set of organizing principles that says that this is okay? I mean, I think we could reassess that, but I don't know exactly what it is, that the earth then becomes a commons that has... These are things, too, that people are talking about. There's a man named Charles Eisenstein who's written extensively on these things, where he's saying that the organization of society and business would be based off of what you would have to pay for the use of the earth's resources. You know what I mean? Like if your product is going to deplete some aquifer, that you pay for that as the business, if that's what you're going to do. And that's where the debt or the GDP or things are based around, this sense of the earth as a commons.
In theory, though, in theory, people are trying that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you look into Fiji water,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically a California company that pays for the rights to this reservoir in Fiji.
Yeah.
The problem is they don't pay them. They pay them pennies on the dollar.
So then that's not proper compensation.
Well, yeah, but I guess in theory, if there was a way to properly compensate people, then it could work, but that's not happening.
Right. Well, it's just because, again, here we are with the idea that because it's not happening, that it won't. But we really do. I think it's not. I've experienced this idea a lot in my life, and it usually comes out, and perhaps maybe you guys are familiar with this too, like in ways that are like, you're too smart for your own good, and you shouldn't. Why are you spending time thinking about these things that you can't do anything about? But I also believe that imagination is a window to possibility. And that's why we make the music that we make as well. You know, that's a product of this. Not necessarily if we can get away from the idea that improvisation, it might possibly be the height of doing, but and all the other reasons that we play, but it fits with this concept, I think. What do you think?
No, I agree with what you're saying. I also say, though, that as far as all of the natural resources go and the funding goes, it's a question of who is controlling it all. Because if you want to look at, oh, well, we're a democracy, we voted, and that's who's running things.
Right.
Those people aren't running anything.
I would say it's a matter of less who, but what system is in place. Because I think people are generally, you have a populace. You're going to have jerks. You're going to have nice people. You're going to have generous people. You're going to have selfish people. Mm-hmm. That's what happens. Doesn't matter what race, what gender, whatever. It does not matter. You're always going to have the same general types of people.
Yeah.
Now, whatever system's in place is going to put certain people in power. So I believe it's the system, and it also is the who, because the system comes from the who, mm-hmm. obviously. But right. it's a dynamic between the two, and sometimes the system has more power than the who, and the mm-hmm. who needs to rise up to be able to edit a system to make certain people that need to be in that position, because everyone plays a part in society. All those types of people I listed play a specific part in society, and I believe right now change may be we have a lot of information out there, so it may seem like a lot is happening, but I believe a lot of that misinformation may lead us to believe that we're more polarized than we are, mm-hmm. and really all of us share a lot of common ground, but what we're told is that we don't have that common ground. We need to band against each other and do certain things. We were led to believe that, so we don't try to come together, see reason, and we step on each other's toes more than we should be walking in a straight line together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wonder, sometimes I think about because the ways which we receive our information that might portray certain conditions that we are in as humans, whether it's true or false or exaggerated or understated. And how, if we're in a position right now, and I talk about this a lot, like, and as far as media and communication and information dissemination goes in the modern era, so let's just say since radio broadcasting, So you used to radio broadcasting when it started. Think about the stories you hear about a Johnny Cash or an Elvis Presley showing up to a radio station and getting invited in to play and be broadcast all over the world. You can't do that now. You would get paid to do that before because they needed the content to put out there, but now you have to pay to utilize that as a way to.
Well, it's also very rare that you can even speak to those people
these days, yeah,
because of the who that they are working for,
and not disseminating information, but disseminating an agenda.
Yeah, but we talked about this yesterday. I think that there's an odd flipping going on with how many people are controlling media. So just like back in the day when there were less people controlling media sources, that you were only hearing one or two voices, we all for like the last 10 years have all been able to share information, but now that's consolidating again. And it's coming back to this like centralized force. Now's kind of probably the opportunity for the local journalists and the local musicians and the local community organizers to go out again and just be like, look, you're only getting your information from these two media sources.
Right.
It's time to open up your eyes a little bit. I think there's opportunity for people like Miles to stand up and do something.
Sure.
Anyone with a phone now can and social media and with some backing can go on there and influence.
When you say backing,
crazy.
What do you mean?
Like people that like what you're saying. It doesn't matter if you make a certain income, doesn't matter if you do this. If people are following what you're saying, believing what you're saying, you have influence. And the resource to get started to doing that, the barrier of spreading your thoughts is much lower than back in the day. And I think that's what you're saying with.
I think that's true, but let's go back to this idea of the ability to generate that awareness, disseminate the information, and generate awareness being something that is paid for, bought and paid for. And now you're saying that anybody with a phone can go out and broadcast themselves and gain a following. But let's just take Facebook and YouTube, for example. YouTube will require that you have at least 1,000 followers before you can do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, that's true.
Facebook will take all the followers that you have and partition them off and not allow you to access them unless you pay for it.
Yeah.
So then on top of that, you have algorithms that mediate what information gets seen. So what you're being presented with is a combination of what is the most popular among everyone and what is also most likely that you yourself will like based off of the content that you've engaged with previously. Yeah. So you are in the middle of not only an echo chamber, but you're not being presented with anything different, and you're not being presented with anything that hasn't met the viewership or engagement standards. So how are you, as a person who is new at doing this, who might not be interested in only delivering to people what is the most popular and capitalizing on the latest trend and hashtag, but as someone who is putting out information that you find valuable yourself, how are you supposed to overcome the hashtag, the trend, the algorithm, the buying, the advertising?
Other people. I guess other people have, because once a company sees, and we're talking these large companies, just in this case, once a company sees, oh, this person has value, oh, this person, other people like this, they're going to turn towards that because it's profitable.
And when they turn to it, do you think that they have an interest to keep it what it is, or do you think that they might have an interest to shift it into what's best for them?
Of course, what's best for them, because that's how these companies survive.
So then, if you get involved in an engagement with this big company that's now sponsoring with big quotes your endeavor, will you be able to maintain the endeavor that you were doing, or will you then shift to what they wanted, and then what are you presenting in that case?
That's a good point. Yeah, it seems the person who owns the resource has the power. That's the.
And does it seem to you that a lot of people own the resources, or that there's a small number of people that are owning the resources?
Yeah, well, it's going to be a small number. We live in a capitalistic society, and it doesn't even matter. In any big country, people will rise. It doesn't really matter what system is in place. Mm-hmm. It's the ability to put people, I would say, under your pyramid. People will work under your pyramid and build you upwards. I mean, any leader in this country in business obviously couldn't get there without the thousands of workers that have put them in that place. But they get that ability to say, this is my company, I did this, but there's so many other people. And it's an interesting thing. It's almost, I don't really know what I'm saying here if I'm comparing it to the military, but if you have someone above you, they will tend to take the responsibility of, they have the responsibility of what you do. If you lose, they will take probably responsibility for what you did, unless they throw you out and they're like, this person did this. Yeah, but if you win, they can put that under their belt. So you can climb your own ladder by putting people under your pyramid. And then they get a larger resource and a larger share of a resource when that happens.
Right, because I see on TV lately, I see an ad that's on TV. I'm not going to name the company, but they're buying hundreds of thousands of electric vehicles. They're putting billions into providing and saving energy. They're doing this, they're doing that. And all of these great things that they list, the one thing that I haven't seen on the list is what's the average wage of the 95% of the people that are working for them, and what income are they generating?
Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic. I know I just spoke, sorry, but it's an interesting dynamic between lining up incentives to make something work. And I know a lot of people complain about the wage gaps, not between women and men, but just classes of people, the 1%, the 99%. And if the incentives are lined up correctly, you have a system where everyone's benefiting. Or the proportion of the resource, let's say, oh, you do this job for me, I'm going to take 50% of what you make because I helped you get to this spot. Is that a fair number? We don't really know unless we try other methods. And looking through time has so much information in it, even though it could be misinformation spreads through time. Looking at a history textbook, there might be some things wrong, it's hard to tell. That looking through time, we could see maybe what was the right balance in terms of progress. What are the right incentives to make things line up correctly to move forward?
Right. Well, I guess I would say that whether or not it's visible in the historic record, that we revisiting the intro and revisiting this idea of the imagination, that I hope that we can all take some time, and that we see the value in taking the time to use our imaginations. Think of the things that will make our condition as inhabitants of this place and the place itself to be just in a more positive condition that benefits people. Whether or not we see it in history, we can imagine it, and we can hopefully then start to implement those things. So, and I think one of those first things is the curiosity to do so. And maybe an understanding that our information, our art, our culture, these things that are being put forward as the most popular are not necessarily the best, whether or not that's in quality or what's good for you. Because what you put in your body will come out. So if you're putting in a lower standard, if you're putting in food that is not good for you, it's not going to sustain you. And the same is true for the stuff that we put into our bodies emotionally, intellectually, culturally, art, music, all of it. I think that if we could just generate a little bit of curiosity and interest to take a step away and assess and make decisions, I think we might get a little bit closer there. So let's all pretend more. So I appreciate you all being here, Ross, Tommy, and let's do it again soon.
Sounds good.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you next time. Thank you all so much for being with us. We are grateful that you give us your consideration and attention. Please follow and reach out to the Spirit of Innovation and Freedom and TechPort on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, or at spiritinnovationfreedom.com and techportsomd.org, and also www.progressculture.org. Let us know what you're thinking and what you want to hear about and how you're feeling. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to see you again next week on Progress Culture. Thank you, much love, and see you soon.